All right, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to join them at some point after I advance the slides for a little bit. But we appreciate you being with us today as we discuss Women in Emergency Medicine Leadership, a call for faculty development and methods for improving the pipeline. And so we're going to keep the beginning portion of the didactic very short and really allow a lot more opportunity for us to have some discussion and dialogue and really have an opportunity to answer some questions along the way from our panelists. So our disclosures are noted on this slide. I think many of us probably aspire to disclosures along the way. And so I am going to take a moment and just let our panelists introduce themselves. I will start, and they are going to tell you just a little bit about themselves and their current role. So I'm Lou Ann Lawson. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education and Student Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University and a professor of emergency medicine.
Hi, I'm Marquita Norman. I am Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at UT Southwestern, where I serve as Associate Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine, Health Equity, Quality, and Safety.
Hi, I'm Deb Dirks. I'm Chair of Emergency Medicine at UT Southwestern.
My name is Lee Patterson. I'm the Chair of Emergency Medicine at East Carolina University.
I'm Sanjay Gupta. I'm Chair of Emergency Medicine at Northwell Health, South Shore University Hospital.
All right, so thank you all so much for joining us today. And so really we're just going to talk briefly about what women in the pipeline of emergency medicine look like. So currently, we're incredibly excited that over 50% of our applicants to medical school are women, and that with that, when we look back to 1985, that actually was like 35%. So significant amount of progress has been made during that time. I also want to acknowledge at the beginning of this, while we're focused on, this was really focused around women, that we recognize that people come with many different identities, and we're going to talk a little bit about intersectionality as part of this as well. And, but as we're looking at women specifically, which is what this data speaks to, medical school graduates are about 50%, but as you can see, the further along that you go in your career in emergency medicine, that these numbers drop off significantly. So these represent women in academic medicine. So when you look at leadership roles, women department chairs are a very small percentage, and when you look at deans, that becomes even smaller. If you look at emergency medicine and women in emergency medicine, those numbers are actually even significantly smaller for our residents. So percentage of female residents are about 40%. So these numbers, we have really an opportunity to think about how do we improve this pipeline. And of course there is some lag just by virtue of time, and many of these people in senior leadership positions did come at a time when maybe there weren't as many women who were accepted to medical school. But even beyond that, we actually see a pretty significant gap. And this is a recent report, manuscript that was published that looks at emergency medicine workforce attrition. So there's been lots of discussion about the emergency medicine workforce, many sort of discussions about the projected shortages of emergency medicine physicians, and then some more recent discussions about surplus. But I think when we look at the data, it really sort of speaks to the fact that it's concerning that we're going to have a shortage of emergency medicine physicians, particularly in underserved or rural areas. And if you look at this data from 2013 to 2019, on the left is the male attrition rate. So it actually has dropped for males from the age of 59 to 53. In under a decade, and if you look at women, it's dropped from 45 to 43 years of age. So what they found at the time of this publication is that females overall were 12 years younger than their male counterparts leaving, if you looked at the entirety of that age range. The median age for both males and females decreased considerably. And those who attritioned between 2013 and 2019 after residency, females left 7 years before their male counterparts, if you look at that post-residency, number of years post-residency. So with that, we are going to turn it over to our panelists and have them share their experiences with you all. And so what I would like each of them to do is really share a little bit about their journey and their experiences, either as a female leader in academic emergency medicine or as an ally in leadership, and really thinking about how they support women in emergency medicine leadership roles.
Okay, so as I mentioned, my name is Marquita Norman. My journey through academic emergency medicine, I think that I initially started out where I think a lot of women started, sometimes in the student affairs space. I started out with general medical education or undergraduate medical education, teaching medical students, and progressed into someone identified me for an opportunity to work with grants, and particularly a grant that supported diversity pathway programs for K through 16. So you can imagine that's not a traditional career for emergency medicine. I think it's a little bit out the box. And so I would jokingly say in my department, they knew I worked, but they didn't know what I did on a daily basis because I was working with like a lot of kids, undergrads. And that kind of transitioned into continuing into student affairs at the UME, and then an assistant dean role where I transitioned to another institution. Since we're talking about intersectionality, I'm also a mom, so that kind of played into things as well. So currently, about 2 years ago, Dr. Dierks gave me the opportunity to transition and pivot a little bit. I love the student affairs space. I do think personally that sometimes as far as challenges as a woman, you can get pigeonholed down certain paths. And I kind of wanted to do something else. And so this transition allowed me to pivot more in the clinical operations space while still utilizing the experience and the skills that I had learned within my DEI kind of work also. And so now I'm learning more about kind of quality safety and marrying that with health equity. And so that's kind of my journey thus far. And I'm still on this path.
I think that's funny. I think personally, I think we're all still on a path of like trying to figure things out in a journey into your career. I think there's always going to be that next step. So I'm Deb Dierks. I am a chair. I can tell you, I did not go into this world of emergency medicine to be a chair. I didn't even go into this medicine thing to be emergency medicine. I was going to be a family practitioner until I did my emergency medicine rotation, and then really fell in love with it and really like being a doctor and really like working clinically. And so did my residency, and someone said, hey, you should do a research project, and I did. And that just created a big sponsor for me, who then kind of pulled me into other cardiovascular research where I met a bunch of people. Went to Davis finishing up my residency, and was there for a lot of years, kind of worked up from kind of just worker bee to a nocturnist since my youngest daughter was born. And she's a second year med student, and I still am a nocturnist. So I've done all my career pretty much working early nights. And got to do that, got to be a kind of work up the research realm. And I'm not the traditional, like, heavily federally funded researcher. I did a lot more kind of industry work, did a lot more projects, kind of was more of a manager, I think, of research. I did that pretty well. And then people I had met through my sponsor as a resident called me and said, hey, you want to apply for a job in Dallas to be a chair? And these were cardiologists who I only knew through research and committees. Hadn't worked with them, never worked with them. And one of them just happened to be on the search committee. The other one happened to be the EVP of our health system. And they said, come interview, and I did. And I'm like, wow, I didn't think I'd ever go to Dallas since I'm a California person. But I moved to Dallas, and I really loved that. And then also, a few years later, the senior dean of clinical research was somebody else I had worked with in my cardiovascular world, just through connections. Again, never worked with him personally, never worked with him clinically, just met him through sponsorship. And so then I think just my story is more one of relationships. And I think just taking advantage of all the amazing people that you get to meet along the way, because I think that those building relationships has helped me kind of in my position now. I think it's helped me in kind of taking some leadership in the chairs group that I'm finally not the leader of anymore, and just kind of my entire career.
So again, my name is Lee Patterson. My journey could probably be summed up in interim roles. When I go back and write my memoirs, it's going to be a section for each. I've had 5, so I'm not joking about that. I began in education. I loved my residency. I did not envision I would ever be here. To be honest, I didn't envision at first that I would ever be faculty. My faculty mentor and my program director were really instrumental in that and saying, no, you can do this, you can do this, you could try for things. And my first role was as interim program director. I took a job at my now university as the associate PD. And kind of ended up with a field promotion years before I really recommend other people do that, kind of in hindsight. Loved it, and then ended up doing that for about a decade. I took a couple of other interim roles after I finished thinking, I don't believe you can be a PD indefinitely. It's an all-consuming, wonderful job, but after about a decade, it's time to do something different. And I moved into faculty development for my institution. I was the interim faculty associate dean for faculty development. And then ended up taking that permanent position and ended up with my two of my really interesting roles. I was the interim chair for pathology. And I'm not a pathologist, I'm one of you. We're emergency medicine. They're the exact opposite of us in so many different ways, educationally scoped, lots of different things. But I was sort of dispatched there by my dean because I was working with that department in my role in faculty development. And until then, I had never envisioned I would take this kind of role. I don't like spreadsheets, and I didn't think I understood a lot of things we needed to do. I wasn't from the operational arm of the department, but I loved it, and in some ways, it was a really great experience for me I couldn't solve their problems by doing their work. I had to help them do their work and lead themselves, and they had a number of challenges. You can imagine if you ended up getting an EM physician assigned to be your chair, something's not right. There was a lot not right in that space, but I did that for about a year, and our chair took an amazing role. And so for about 6 or 8 months of that, I had 2 departments together because I was asked to go back and step into my home department role. There's some things about that are not right. We're not going to go into that today about that. But if you ever get asked to do 2 of those things, call me, because I'm going to help you talk through your dean with that. Because that's a no. That was a real learning experience for me. In hindsight, I can look back and say that should not have happened. But I did that, and I still didn't think that was the job I was going to take. I'm like, this is wonderful. I'm going back to faculty development. I'm going to be an interim chair here, help get my department ready for the next chair. And we had a failed search. And then COVID hit. And then about 2 years into the role, I was like, well, I'm making plans, and they're my plans, and I don't think I want to give that up. I really, really am enjoying thinking about the future of this department. And the spreadsheets weren't so scary, and I have like an MBA who works for me. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to build something I hadn't had to build. I will say that I also had the really big experience. When I've been working in faculty development, I worked with many faculty from other departments on how to talk to your chair. Let's have this conversation of how to ask your chair for a resource or something that you need. But I wasn't the person who could make that happen. And in my institution, it's different for other institutions, but in my institutions, that power resides with the chair. And it was something I wanted to do. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am. And I think are we 20%, 10% of all of us? There are only about 20 of us, I think.
Yeah, I think we're less than that, maybe 7%. We're one of the lower specialties, and then I think when you break into kind of the full, the big academic centers versus not, the number's even smaller.
Really small, yeah.
Well, my journey is going to be a little bit different, what we described. So as an ally, I think it actually goes back, I'm going to go way back to 1961. All right, so my parents are from India. My parents were also very early immigrants to the United States from that part of from the world. And I'm the youngest of 4, 3 older sisters. So it always occurred to me that, can you imagine you come from a place that just achieved independence about 15 years before you like pick up and you move all the way across the world, where there are not a lot of people like you. You speak different language and the strength. So I look at my mom, who was like 5 foot, nothing, who could barely see over the steering wheel. She was one of those that had the little pillow in order to see over the steering wheel. But someone who also came and moved and lived in California and Chicago and New York and ended up in Washington, D.C. 3 older sisters who are all successful, very successful in their own right. So I think that where, I'm going to use the term female success, comes from, looked very different to me growing up. And I think I had the opportunity, I had 2 experiences as an emergency physician. So I won't say where I did residency, but where I did residency was very old school and patriarchal. It was not unusual for me to see my chairperson at the Rams party, just ogling the female residents and medical students there. And that's actually kind of how I grew up. And unfortunately, that was kind of the reputation of the place where I did residency. I had no idea. It was more proximity. But I'm like, there's something really not right about this. But to get away from that environment, I actually had this wonderful opportunity, my first faculty job out of residency, with someone who was actually really the first female chair of emergency medicine in New York City. So humble. But this person set up, who here is anyone from New York? So Fire Department of New York, EMS. This person actually set up the first paramedic training program in all of New York City. I mean, think about that accomplishment in a place where this was dominated by male physicians. She was one of 4 women in her graduating class from medical school. She was well into her 70s at this point. She always gave me these wonderful opportunities to grow. And it's a little bit of paying it forward, but then also just recognizing that all these challenges that female physicians have in advancement, whether it comes from not knowing how to approach kind of I don't want to say male dominant, but a little bit of a male languaged pathway, not understanding in a way that when opportunities come, you got to like jump on them in a way, and not having someone there to give them support. So it's always been, I used to get voluntold to do a lot of stuff, so I voluntold a lot of my docs, particularly the younger ones, into like, hey, listen, there's this opportunity, there's this leadership training program, there's this. You're just going to do it. You're not going to ask any questions. Just trust me, and I'll help you navigate. Or, also at the meantime, finding them, knowing that I'm limited in what I can offer in terms of mentorship, and they're always finding and pairing a successful female mentor for that person in many ways, whether that's here and making connections, and Deb talked about relationships, and relationship-driven advancement's really important. And I got to say, just in my career as a leader, no one has ever kept me more in check of being a jerk than a lot of the female docs in my department, namely, especially Nancy Kwan here. Oh, I did one really bad thing once. Oh man, she made me pay for it for a long time. So, but that's really it. So I think, identifying that there are specific needs and challenges that come about, not only in responsibility, but how everyone has found a way. I think the worst question in the world is like, what do you want to be in 5 years? Because it's a combination of luck, opportunity, when it comes up. So you can't always drive that boat, but you have to make sure there's someone there when something does come up, is going to be there to help you navigate. So that's the way I always look at it.
All right, so what I've heard is the fact that you should always consider the relationships that you have with people, and that you never know when those things are going to come full circle. I would say that is one of the things about academic medicine. It is an incredibly small world. And so finding out those connections and who knows who can really either help or hurt in some cases, depending upon how you've treated that relationship over time. But also the importance of sort of sponsorship and mentorship. And so as you all have thought about this and how incredibly important it's been in your own life, are there recommendations that you would give to folks about how to cultivate those effectively in people's own journeys, as I'm looking at some young faces out here who have a whole world of future and emergency medicine ahead of them?
I mean, I think that the hard part is how I cultivated those relationships is not going to be how you want to. I'll be honest, I mean, especially the young people, right? There are some generational differences where I did everything my chair told me to do when I was a resident. My APD told me to jump, I said how high, right? That is just what I did. He's like, that is how I was raised. That's how I grew up. That's how I don't like to-do lists. They get done. I can still hear my father, who's passed away, in my ear, chirping at me. If you want to play basketball, go out and shoot 100 times, right? That's just how I was raised, and that's not how this generation wants. So I think the challenge I have is how do we take how you all want to approach things and give you what you need when it's not necessarily what we would do, right? And I think that's the hardest part, because a lot of times we're focused on guessing, right? And so to me, and Marquita knows this, I'll just say, hey, I'll throw out articles and opportunities all the time to people, and that can be viewed as, God dang, could you stop sending me crap, right? I don't want to have to say no, and I feel bad, to this isn't what I want. Why the heck are they doing that? And if they're going to do it, I need them to do it differently, and can't they wait for me to ask, right? So I will, so I know more. And I think those are just, it's a challenge right now. We are in a little bit of a precipice where we really, at our level, are struggling a little bit, frankly. I mean, heck, I got 2 kids, who are close to your age, which means I'm really old, and that's okay. But trying to figure out how we get you where you want to go in a manner that fits your needs, not how I would do it. And I think that is where we're at a point where we're going to need a lot of two-way streets. And so although the 5-year, what are you going to do in 5 years is hard, maybe it's what do you need from me in the next 5 years is the question we're going to need to ask, because then we can actually meet your guys' needs in a way that actually promotes your career without making you pissed off, feel guilty, feel like you don't have it, aren't qualified, all those things that go along that we've all gone through. But again, our answers aren't what your guys' answers are going to be, and that is just something that I think we all think about a lot. At least I think about all the time.
I think about the generational differences
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge topic of what's different. I do think concretely, thinking about it in 2 pieces, when you think about networking and development of your circles, you need people in your institution, and then you need people in emergency medicine. So you need to be looking for opportunities in both sections. Are you getting connected to the rest of your institution, whether that is in a in-house orientation program where you get to spend time with departments, other faculty from other departments, seeing about the resources, learning about those, finding peers, getting connected. Ours in our institution for young faculty has a dedicated mentor outside the department, which we really like. We have to contribute some of our own to work with other people, but you need to develop a network in your space, because if you find this great project out here, you've got to be able to do something at home, and if you can't do it in your own institution, that's not helpful. And then you need the network outside. So I think it's looking for places that are going to give you the opportunities to do both of that, and that there are other people there who have in and out circles of connection.
I would also say, at least with my experience, at my first academic institution, I didn't feel like I had everything I needed there. There was, maybe they were doing research, but I wasn't included on it at that point. I kind of say I grew up within SAEM, and I will, because I was voluntold by many of my mentors within the organization, whether it be at the academy level, and that has helped me kind of progress and been helpful in terms of even progressing in different institutions, because of those connections that I made within the organization, I was then able to know people outside of my institution who then helped me navigate my academic career at my institution. I also learned early on that you're not going to have one mentor to be your be-all, end-all. And so, yes, I have that person that I go to when I'm having child issues and how to navigate it from having young children and things like that. I have that mentor that I go to when it's being a woman of color in emergency medicine, and how do I navigate leadership roles within that space. I have that mentor when it was hey, I'm the, assistant dean for diversity and inclusion, and how do I navigate that space from the School of Medicine standpoint? But maybe things aren't what how do I negotiate? I've had those mentors, and I've had some of them that have been women, and many of them that have been my male colleagues who have provided such invaluable expertise and suggestions to help me kind of progress in my career.
All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the audience. So who has questions? I have a whole long list of questions for them, but I want to engage you all.
Thanks. I have a role as ultrasound division director, and I have a hard time, I think a lot of my female faculty, they often leave because they want to start a family, and they don't come back. And I want to find ways to encourage them to come back into academics, because most of them end up deciding that they're like, I can't balance it. What has worked for you guys that you've seen that has worked, I guess, at different hospitals or academic institutions? Because I want to try to encourage some of my younger faculty that had left to come back into academics, that it's a career worth pursuing, even if it's not financially, for just like your own career growth, because a lot of them will just leave and go to the community, maybe like go part-time and then never want to come back. But they have a lot of skills. They could, and I want them to be able to use that in the future.
So they are not your target. That's not who you need to talk to. And this is a bigger part of some of the discussions we had getting ready for this session. They are not the problem. They are not. The situation in which they work is the problem. And so there are some things I think you can say to them individually, but the problem is who they work for and where they work. Because you've set up a system such that you can't do that, because you're looking at it and you're saying, yep, I see talent, I see value, I see a person there. They're commodities. They're valuable commodities, and they're walking out the door, and we've let them walk out the door. So what can you do if you were in the position to have a conversation with the people who are letting them walk out the door? There are a lot of things you can do with folks like that. You have to have the philosophy and the approach as an institution that this career has multiple phases, and people step in and step out. And that stepping out in a short term, particularly to be a parent, is not a problem, provided that you are open and willing to consider a step back in again. So things that can be done, you can talk about reducing your FTE, your overall FTE, for a period of time in the institution. It's one of the easiest things you can do, and in most institutions you can still be a full-time person, approximately 70% of what you were. With benefits, with other things, maybe you give up some of that, but you take that for a couple of years, and then you decide when you're ready to come back, but we have to be willing to take you back. But you're still there. We didn't lose you, so you still have that connection in that space. That is one of those things to do. The other thing is to say, what is it that's so hard about this job that you can't be a parent while you do it? Why is that? Do we have a schedule that is completely untenable, unpredictable, and creates childcare hassles for you? Do we not have child care available to you? And these are institutional things that you really have to talk to, but I think that is a wonderful thing to be thinking about, but so very little of it is up to them. Like, we've put them in that position that they can't. And I think when you were talking about generationally, yep, what's really interesting is I don't think you're that much older than I am, but there's a lot of our generation smack in the middle of Gen X, and certainly a lot of boomer influence, and who raised us in our own training program. We didn't walk away. Our kids sacrificed. We did that. Even to be talking about how much you talk about being a mom, like that is not happening in an institution where women are walking out the door to go be a parent somewhere else because they can't like make a living and be a parent at the same time. Sorry, I feel very strongly about that topic when you get into it. But yes.
Because I live in New York City, child care is the biggest issue for us. It's so expensive to get child care in New York City. That's usually people are like the main reason they leave is because they're like, I can't afford to, I have to choose. I can't do both.
Can I just add that those comments you made are really resonating with me? I think the other interesting thing that I would add is often women particularly are quitting quietly, is in we don't even do exit interviews to figure out that this is a problem, and nobody has to take that data that people would give them and deal with it. So that's another, if you don't have some sort of exit interview process that's going on in your institution, that's something you can do. Even if you don't have the direct power, you can advocate for that to happen. And then, that's a source of data accumulation that then someone has to deal with.
I mean, I think a lot of it is the ability now to talk about these issues, right? To talk about childcare issues. To talk about, we had to talk in our faculty meeting about how are we as a group going to handle breastfeeding during shift, right? So how do we sign out, and what's that process to sign out to people so people don't have to take their charts to go while they do it, right? That wasn't what we wanted, but let's just have a conversation about that in a faculty meeting. I can tell you when I started, good God, I think half the men would pass out if we had said, we need to talk about breastfeeding today, right, in our faculty meeting. They would have just died. But those are topics that we can discuss now. We can discuss and make it open, so discussing childcare issues can be a group solve, right? One of the best things I think we did is we just took a vote and said, look, we think this is the data on best practices. We don't think women should work the nights last trimester. Do we want them to have to make it up? And the entire faculty voted, and they said, no, we don't. So it was a buy-in of everybody to make people feel like it's more okay to do what they felt they needed for the best thing for their family and for balance. And I think the freedom we have now is it's okay to have these discussions. Now, HR may not like them, but your group can have them, right? And we can just discuss what's going on to make it more acceptable, and so people don't feel like they're managing all the challenges that go along with daycare, all those things, that we can handle it in more of a group manner and in a supportive manner.
I also want to add that I think that we as individual faculty, when we feel those challenges coming up, we need to be proactive instead of reactive. And I will just give a little bit of my personal story to that, because I've had my share of challenges, which clearly my chair is completely aware of, because I am so open. So throughout the navigation of a career, I have a 15-year-old. I've had challenges where when he was younger, got kicked out the daycare. I was like, what is going on? And I went to my chair at that time and was like, something is going on in my home. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna need to be there in the evening. I am willing to do whatever it takes. I will work nights. I will work any shift on the weekend. I will work more weekends. But at least Monday through Thursday, I need to be at my house because I need to know what's going on in the evening. And because I was a little proactive, I was able to kind of navigate that situation. We resolved it clearly within a few months, but at least it was a conversation to have with my chair at that time. I went through a divorce. You can imagine, I'm in a leadership position. I'm navigating life as a single mom at this point. And I'm like, I need to figure out this kind of picture. Okay, my chair at the time, well, what do you need from us? What do we need the schedule to look like? I end up picking up more shifts during resident conference time. I end up picking up more weekends. So it's like if we go into the approach of like just being more proactive and having those conversations, I know they're scary to have because you're like, oh, how are people gonna look at me and stuff like that, but I can tell you, at least from my personal experience and even navigating older parents now and grandparents, still challenges, which, like I said, my chair is aware of. So, but having those conversations have just been vital in terms of like just handling the scheduling and getting a lot of the crazy stuff out the way.
I'll chime in. 5.5 years ago, I took over a department that had yearly about a 40% turnover rate. So obviously not a good culture. In that time, my turnover rate is pretty much zero, except for people who move out of state. That's only because I'm a great leader. No, I'm just joking around. But part of it is this discussion, and it's really, I think if you think about the perspective of someone who sits in a leadership role, so I'm 50, and I'm Gen X, and I'm very Gen X, and I'm looking at the world through a certain point of view, but I'm open to try to understand what everyone else's point of view is. And it's scary. It's scary, like going to your leader and going, I need this, or I have seen this. But any good leader is going to be open to that. And they're going to be really open to that. Also, you don't have to do it alone. You know, you have a group of people, trust me, in your cohort that are feeling the same thing. And to start the conversation is the hardest step. But if you have leadership in your department that you hope provides a good culture, they should be open to the discussion. You know, you're not always going to get everything that you want, but you're never going to get anything unless you bring that up. So even so many of these discussions resonated with me. Coming back with, we've had a lot of construction. So having doctors coming back on maternity and going, where am I going to pump? The lactation room is all the way on the 3rd floor. I'm like, yeah, that's a problem. So, you know, trying to navigate even within your own department, because you have committed physicians who don't want to leave the ED to go to do this essential thing. So how do you work with that? And your leaders will work with you if they're good leaders. So something to keep in mind. The scary part is that first step, but if there's a need, people are going to want to do that. The ultrasound division, you know, one strategy that I always take is, in my academic department, is what do people need? So if that ultrasound division has so much turnover, does that division need to change? Like, what is the endpoint, for instance? Is it output of scans? Is it billing? Is it this? Can that still be accomplished, but done in a completely different way in terms of coverage and staffing and output? You know, I think leaders are pretty flexible. I don't think you guys fully understand what any of us go through on a daily basis, having to deal with hospital leadership, health system leadership, service line leadership, dealing with the people who work for us. If we weren't flexible, we would not survive in these roles very long. So keep that in mind as you think about something that's boiling up and you feel like you need to approach. It's okay to do that. You know, and phone a friend if you need to. So.
I think too, just to emphasize that some changes can be made pretty quickly. Other things take a lot longer, and so especially when, depending upon where you are in your life cycle of career development, sometimes a year can seem really long, and sometimes we're like, wow, that happened quickly. It was, you know, because we never had discussions, at least when I was when I had a child, about breastfeeding. I would call my husband on the way home from work, and I'd be like, don't dare feed that kid. I'm coming home. And so I think just even having those discussions, it's taken a long time. It's still not perfect, but it is moving in the right direction. But it takes being brave enough to have some of those conversations in the process.
Hello. I have a question kind of for advice or how to navigate. I am from New York, so I'm from up north, and I'm doing my residency in a southern program, which, although there is actually probably about 40% to 50% women like attendings, it's a very patriarchal, old school, very much stereotypical, male-run dominated kind of program where they kind of, most of the women are very quiet and just go with emotions. And then the couple of attendings that might raise their voice a little bit more to try and affect positive change or just bring up an issue, whether it has to do with womanhood or not, they tend to get like shut down or talked about horribly and just dragged through the mud. And even as a resident, I hear it and I see it, which is unfortunate. But even also on the other side of being a resident and trying to maybe bring up change within the program when it comes to recruitment. For example, now our program has way more women residents than we did before too, so that's big. But the 2 female residents that ran that to try and get the recruitment, they really faced a lot of issues. And like, there's just lots of issues, I guess. And it's like how as a woman in a place where the women's voices are not as respected, how do you go about not hurting anyone's ego, but still figuring out how to like try and affect change somehow?
That was a hard question.
So you aren't going to be able to take care of their egos.
Yeah.
Okay?
First
Like,
thing,
you gotta
don't
let
care
that go.
about- Yeah, the egos don't matter.
I mean, so let me reflect a minute. You have indoctrinated well into the southernness of what we call North Carolina nice, at least where I'm from, where it's, let me make some change so it doesn't hurt you. And I don't want other people to be hurt by the change or in their growth in that, but I think you do have to let that go. As somebody who was raised in the South, very deep parts of the South, there's something about turning 50 and you're like, fuck it, I don't care anymore. And I'm not suggesting you adopt that at your young age, and but it's that sort of metaphorical putting on the overalls and growing tomatoes, like kind of thing. But you have to let that go first and foremost, and then you have to decide what is really important. What are we trying to do? Is this a principled problem? Do we feel like? And I feel like I hear you saying that people are being dismissed and not heard, that opinions are not valued, dissent is not valued. And so you have a real problem at the top of that. You probably can't fix that. You probably can't fix that as a resident, to be very frank. I don't think you can, because that's a leadership problem at your department level and probably at your institutional level, because that's been allowed to persist at the department level. So you kind of have to decide how much you're going to personally sacrifice right now of yourself, and what is so important that you've got to sacrifice it, that you're willing to sacrifice it within the confines of your residency time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, God bless your heart. And I mean, I think that is the challenge, and I think it is. I mean, UT Southwestern, the leaders, they're all white males. I mean, they're trying to bring more in. They brought more in, but it's a very old school hierarchical thing. And so, I'm one of the token 2 female chairs right now. And so my ability to make change isn't me. I can't go in, and pound the table. I can get people who amplify and allies. And together, we actually make change at the lunch table the day before the meeting than we do when we go into the meeting. And again, that's just relationships. And so I think even as a resident, to be the only person carrying the flag, it's a lonely spot and it's dangerous, right? You're the only target. But to have that group that you can work with and develop your amplifiers, not only in your class, among all the classes, you can slowly get change by all stating the same purpose. In a manner that, it's not one person that can target, it's everybody, which really helps. It's just, and then you have to say eventually, this isn't the place for me. And I think it's okay to say, I can't change the environment I'm in, so I need to change the environment where I'm in, and I can leave. And I think that is something that all of us have to do at some point and have to think about, right? Because it's hard. Because you're really comfortable where you are, and making that big step is hard. But I think, especially in our industry, we don't move that much, but in every other industry, they do. And I think just accepting the fact it's okay to change jobs. It's okay to change, cities. It's okay to find your happiness. Except for if you work for me, please don't leave. I need people. Mary, don't raise your hand.
I was going to add on, but one thing too is sometimes, especially being vocal about it, because sometimes the people who've been in that female roles and stuff like that, they've kind of gotten used to it, and they forget. And sometimes bringing it up in a way that makes them kind of get a little bit mama bear about okay, I've decided that I'm just going to put up with these male colleagues who do these behaviors because whatever, but wait, it's not okay for them to treat you like that. And it really can bring out a lot of, and even the male attendings, right? Like the ones who have a little bit more of that ally, kind of who you get any sense. People don't always know how the you assume they do. You kind of assume that all the attendings know who the bad players are. We had one women in EM meeting, and it was great discussion, all this stuff. And I don't know if it was the cocktails or just one of those things where they were waiting until but it was like we were wrapping up, and one of the residents was like,
what if there's someone who really gets inappropriate? Like, it was just this like, oh, by the way, as we're like kindergarten, we're like, oh, stop. Like, that's actually why this whole thing exists, right? So we can have these discussions. But we would never know. This person was never inappropriate with us because we were their colleagues, that sort of thing. So I think just talking to people that you do see as allies and helping them see like, you could defend me. You have more power in this institution. And they're probably like, if you're training, I'm gonna leave, but like, oh, I'm here, maybe I should try and make some change. And sometimes it's a lot easier to ask other people to change on behalf of someone else than like, oh, women are used to I'll just be uncomfortable because that's what society tells us we should be. But, oh, you shouldn't be uncomfortable. Like, let me help you.
I don't have an actual question, but I wanted to put it out there, like the conversation we were having about women leaving the workforce and childcare and whatnot, and things that the department could do or the institution could do to make it more palatable for them to stay. I just want to put it out there. We need to have those conversations before someone is pregnant and needs the accommodations, because I think it is very uncomfortable for folks to come to the chair with, hey, I need something special for me because I have this thing. Whereas if the thing already exists and I know about it, then it is less onerous on me as the person to come to administration to ask for something. So like knowing that there's the breastfeeding room on two sides of the ED that is available to you that you don't notice because it looks like a closet, but when you open the door, you're like, oh, that's real nice. It's got a real nice chair in it and it's comfortable, but you've never been in it because you had no business in there otherwise, you know? Like, I have a feeling half my residents have no clue that we have this room. It's got a sink in the whole nine. But it's not labeled, so it looks like a straight up closet, and we never used it for anything else, but it's there, and it's actually in our space where you can still hear the overhead if you needed to and all that other kind of stuff. I think knowing that there is like family leave for whatever you need it for and how that works, and knowing it up front lets you plan a little bit better than trying to fit it around your schedule or whatnot. I am Dr. Patterson's I'm mid-career faculty, she tells me. Like our department is like very forthright about like what we have available in terms of leave and how that works, which is very helpful. And I think that it has changed the tone in our department about things like family leave. Like, I think 10 years ago, men would not be like, I'm gonna take paternity leave. Like, I'm gonna go be with my baby. Now they expect to get the 8 weeks like the rest of us, 12 weeks, something, whatever it is. I don't have children, but like, I know that the people who do value this, you know, like you don't hear grumbling about like, we have to cover for so-and-so. And those conversations have changed now because this is the tone of the department, this is how it works. And it didn't change because someone needed something, like the institution decided that this is what we're going to do, and they just made it known. And so I would just ask for transparency and try to fix the things before it's a problem. So like once you know women are leaving, try to fix that thing and put it out there so that they don't have to try to fix it themselves so that they can fight to stay.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a stand and talk person. Sorry. I'm Krista Mueller. I'm WashU in St. Louis, and I just don't know any of you, so I feel like names always help. But my question is about engagement and reach, especially as we think about our residents and our early career faculty and kind of growing them through the pipeline to both be successful in academia and then, going through the stages of promotion. Kind of with some of the energy that came out of FemInM in like 2017, 18, 19, for those of you who were around for that, we grew a chapter in St. Louis, which was basically like a social group for women in emergency medicine. And we've kept it on, but since in the post-COVID world, we have had a very difficult time getting people to physically show up, which is hard. I mean, COVID gave me my introvert time, and I'm never gonna turn back from that, but my question for you all is, and the folks who are in charge of that now in our chapter, we're all now mid-career, and my question is, should we be doing a better job of having leadership folks coming from our junior faculty, our residents, helping to plan activities? Should we just keep showing up and holding out our hands until people are ready so they know we're there when they're ready to access services, or build out a set curriculum? What is your, expertise in how to engage the residents and the junior faculty in that kind of peer support?
That's a tough one. I think we struggle with it a lot. and especially in the School of Medicine, everyone's handling that engagement differently. Some of our colleagues are like, everyone back in person all the time, every time, screw virtual stuff, right? And I think, we see that engagement really matters, and that some people really like talking to their colleagues. Some people don't necessarily. Not that they don't like their colleagues, but they'd rather not see them in person. They'd rather, do everything virtual. And so I think it is almost, we have to be both at this time, I think. I think we will lose people if we say everyone's got to come back. We've taken away some of the freedoms and the time ownership that people really value, of being able to control and listening to meetings in their pajamas and doing their laundry while they're doing stuff. That's valuable to some people. But we have to be there for others who really need that connection to a human. And so I think that we are in this hybrid kind of world right now, especially in emergency medicine, because we have such crazy hours that even the Femin EM, and we have our Women EM meetings, and I think it's kind of got to be both at this point.
I was going to say, and I agree, it's kind of both and, not either or situation. But also, in terms of I do think there's a way to engage them from a standpoint of just kind of reaching out to them. I think some people are just waiting to be kind of tapped on the shoulder for stuff because they don't think oh, well, I can do this, or I'm ready for this particular role, or I'm ready to take on this committee structure or something like that. And maybe you want them to serve within that feminine group in a committee chair or subcommittee chair or something like that. I think just tap them on the shoulder, hey, there's this opportunity. What do you think? Also helps, at least because I had a recent person here even was like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready. I was like, yeah, you're ready. They wouldn't have tapped you on the shoulder. They wouldn't even thought if they didn't think you were ready. You've done all this other work. So I think we still struggle with a lot of particularly junior faculty still feeling like they can't do it, even though we see kind of that light in them, and we know it, but we have to kind of tell them.
And with that, it is hard to believe our time is up, but I hear the volume building at the door behind me. So thank you so much for coming. I also want to express our appreciation to Nancy Kwan, who shepherded us into this. And so thank you for your support and help, Nancy, for pulling this together. And people will be probably around for maybe just a couple minutes if people have any other questions. Thank you all so much for coming.